Oh, wait a minute, you might be saying to me. God did give us a bunch of rules, didn't he? God gave us the 10 Commandments. God gave us the Mosaic Law. So he gave us all these rules. So what about those? Okay, so that is true. In the Old Testament, God gave the Israelites all the Mosaic Law. It's like pages and pages and pages of all of these complex, crazy rules. And yes, he did give that to them, but he only gave that to them after he first had tried and tried and tried to have relationship with them. He had tried, he had chosen them, he had called them out from the rest of the people of the world. He had showered them with favor, with gifts, with miracles. He saved them from their oppression, took them out of slavery, did all of these miracles for them. He fed them food from angels, manna. He fed them. He saved them. He did all of these things for them. And yet over and over and over again, they said no God. They said no to him, and they ran off after these pagan gods. They rejected God no matter what he did. All of his showering them with gifts and his favor and reaching out to them for relationship. And they ran off after these other gods, pagan gods. And then he would forgive them and they would come back to him, but then they would do it again over and over and over again. And that's what he started off with, trying to have just relationship. And so after enough of these times of them running off after the pagan gods, God finally said, okay, fine, have it your way. Have it your way. If you want to be in charge, if you want to be in control, you want to save yourself and be your own God, just like Adam and Eve, then fine, you can do that. But here you go. Here is what is required. If you want to be your own God, here's what is required for you to save yourself. And he gave them the Mosaic Law, pages and pages and pages of complex, crazy rules that are impossible to follow. And here's what I think that God wanted to do. Here's what I think that God intended, because now God knew what they were going to do. He knew what they were going to do before they did it, when he gave them the Mosaic Law. But you know how he works with us. God, he knows if we're going to mess up, but he still gives us chance after chance after chance, right? So I think that what God wanted to happen was that he would give all of these crazy rules and laws to the Israelites. They would take one look at it and say, oh, you know what, God? We can't do that. That's crazy. That's impossible. Let's go back to plan A, God, and we're just going to go with a relationship with God, okay? Let's try that again. I think that's what he was really wanting to happen. But what happened instead? What did they do instead? Did they bow the knee to God and say, oh, no, you're right. We can't, you're right. We can't save her. No, they didn't. They said, okay, thank you very much, God. Give us those rules. Give us those rules. Thank you for telling us this. We can now go save ourselves because now we have these rules. Now we're in control because we know what we need to do. We understand this. So God, we don't need you anymore. See, that's what they said. They said the same thing that Adam and Eve said. They said, God, we don't need you anymore. And they ran off and they went about the business of trying to save themselves. And so over the years, as they realized that, you know what, we can't follow these crazy rules. There's way too many of these rules. And so then a lot of them simply rejected God and went after all the pagan gods like they were doing before. But others of them, the religious leaders, what they did in order to get around this was to build, to create all these new rules on top of the original rules that God had given them, so that to keep them from breaking God's rules, they created this whole system of laws on top of the other rules that God had created. Okay, so that by the time Jesus entered the scene, hundreds of years later, they had created hundreds and hundreds and I think there was something like 400 plus rules that the religious leaders, the Jewish religious leaders, had created and piled up on top of the original law that God had given them. And so they had created this system that was backbreaking, soul-killing, cold, dead, legalistic system that was not saving anybody. In fact, if you know how the religious leaders acted, you read about them in the New Testament. I mean, they actually were the ones who arranged to have Jesus murdered. So not only was this law, the system of legalism that they'd created, it was not saving anybody. It was turning them into monsters. Okay, that's what happens with all of these rules when you just try to follow rules. Okay, and then Jesus came, and then Jesus told them this. When one of them, a lawyer, asked Jesus a question, he said, testing him, he said, "Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law? Which is the most important rule, Jesus? And Jesus said, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the great and foremost commandment. So he says, this is the most important rule. Love God. And then he said, the second rule is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. And then he says this, upon these two commandments, hang the whole law and the prophets. So everything in the Mosaic Law, all those crazy complex rules, God says, it was never about following a bunch of rules because it all hangs on these two rules. And what are these two rules according to Jesus? Love. Love. It was never about following rules. It was always about love. And what is love? Love is relationship. In relationship, love is messy. And this is according to Jesus. According to Jesus.